The famous red sofa had seen countless unforgettable conversations, but on this particular evening, it seemed to carry an unusual tension. What was supposed to be another light-hearted celebrity chat slowly transformed into a serious exchange that left both the audience and the host struggling to keep up. At one end of the sofa sat Helen Mirren, the celebrated actress whose decades of work had earned her widespread admiration and the title of Dame. At the other sat Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, whose departure from royal life had sparked years of headlines, interviews, and public debate. Their backgrounds could hardly have been more different, yet both had become closely linked to the British monarchy in very different ways. From the opening moments, there was an unmistakable sense that their perspectives would eventually collide. The conversation began calmly enough when the discussion turned to Queen Elizabeth II and the meaning of public service. Helen reflected on what she had learned while portraying the late monarch on screen. She described duty not as a burden, but as a lifelong commitment, explaining that some people dedicate themselves completely to serving something greater than their own personal wishes. According to Helen, Queen Elizabeth woke up every day knowing that her private desires would always come second to her responsibilities. That level of sacrifice, she suggested, was something few people could truly understand. Meghan listened quietly before offering a different viewpoint. She remarked that while some may see the institution as a place of honor, others experience it as restrictive. Her words instantly changed the mood in the studio. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing that the discussion had become far more personal than anyone expected. Helen turned toward Meghan with calm curiosity rather than anger. She acknowledged that every person's experience could differ, but explained that she had spent years studying the monarchy while preparing for her role. What she discovered, she said, was not a simple story of heroes or villains, but an institution filled with complexity, history, and difficult responsibilities. Meghan replied that research from the outside could never compare to living within the royal family itself. Personal experience, she argued, revealed realities that books and documentaries could never fully capture. Helen accepted the point, but responded thoughtfully. Observation and participation certainly offered different perspectives, she said, yet time also mattered. A lifetime of history often revealed patterns that a few years alone could not. Host Norton laughed nervously, attempting to lighten the atmosphere by noting that the audience was fortunate to have both viewpoints represented on the same sofa. Instead of moving on, Helen gently continued. She admitted she had long been curious about something. "The institution you describe so critically," she said, "is also the institution that introduced you to millions of people around the world. It transformed you from a successful actress into a globally recognized duchess. How do you reconcile criticizing something that also provided such extraordinary opportunities?" The studio fell noticeably quieter. Meghan answered that she had earned her position through her marriage and that her accomplishments since leaving royal life were entirely her own. Helen nodded politely, but continued her line of questioning. She pointed out that the title of Duchess of Sussex had been granted by the monarchy itself. The worldwide attention, she suggested, had grown enormously because of Meghan's connection to the royal family. Major interviews, publishing deals, streaming projects, and speaking engagements all seemed closely tied to that identity. Graham attempted to steer the conversation toward another topic, sensing the growing discomfort. Before he could change direction, Helen calmly asked one final question. "What have you built that stands completely apart from your royal association?" The words lingered in the studio. For several long moments, nobody spoke. The audience remained silent. Graham waited without interrupting, and every camera stayed focused on Meghan as the unexpected pause stretched across the studio. What had begun as a friendly Friday night interview had suddenly become a thoughtful confrontation about identity, legacy, and the complicated relationship between personal achievement and public recognition. Helen remained composed as the conversation grew more intense. Her voice stayed measured, but every question seemed to land with greater weight than the last. "I've spent my entire career earning recognition," she said. For more than 50 years, I've worked in theater, television, and film. Every opportunity, every award, every honor came through years of dedication. Even becoming a dame was the result of decades of service to my profession." She paused before continuing, "What achievement of yours, separate from your marriage, has brought you the same kind of recognition?" The audience grew noticeably quieter. Meghan replied that she had already built a successful acting career before meeting Prince Harry. She reminded everyone that she had worked consistently and had established herself in Hollywood long before entering royal life. Helen acknowledged that success, but gently questioned the scale of it. "You had a respected career," she said, "but the level of worldwide attention you're known for today came afterward. That's simply the sequence of events." Meghan quickly shifted the conversation toward the charitable work she had pursued since stepping away from royal duties. She mentioned the foundation she and Harry had launched, saying it reflected their commitment to helping communities and supporting meaningful causes. Helen nodded thoughtfully. "I'm always interested in charitable work," she replied. "I've supported organizations for many years, and I admire projects that produce measurable results. Schools built, families helped, communities strengthened. Those outcomes speak for themselves. I'm simply asking what specific impact your foundation has achieved." Before Meghan could fully respond, Graham Norton attempted to redirect the discussion, sensing the growing tension in the room. "Helen, perhaps we could move to—" But Helen continued. "I'm not trying to be unfair," she said calmly. "I'm trying to understand." Meghan shifted forward on the sofa, clearly frustrated. "I don't appreciate being interrogated by an actress," Helen answered without raising her voice. "I've spent decades studying history through my work, including portraying Queen Elizabeth II. My career has been built through years of preparation and professional achievement. That's why I'm asking these questions." The exchange had become impossible to ignore. Helen then referred to recent reports suggesting that Meghan had not attended a royal family gathering. She observed that such reports had generated significant discussion and asked whether strained relationships within the family had become difficult to overcome. Meghan dismissed the stories as media speculation. Helen replied that disagreements within families often have lasting consequences, particularly when private matters become public. She suggested that trust, once damaged, can take years to rebuild. Again, Graham tried to interrupt. "Ladies, perhaps we should—" Helen leaned slightly forward. "When you married into the royal family," she asked, "what did you expect? Did you believe centuries of tradition would immediately adapt to your preferences, or that the institution would change because a new member had joined?" "I expected kindness and basic decency," Meghan answered. Helen acknowledged that expectation before listing what she believed had also been provided: a globally watched wedding, worldwide recognition, an official title, residences, staff, and significant public support during the early years. Meghan responded that her greatest difficulty had been the treatment she received from the media. Helen agreed that press attention could be harsh, but observed that many members of the royal family had endured similar scrutiny over the years. "What made your situation different," she suggested, "was how publicly you chose to respond." Meghan insisted that speaking openly about her experiences was an act of honesty. Helen replied that those interviews, documentaries, and publishing projects had also become highly successful commercial ventures. "The distinction," she said carefully, "is that deeply personal experiences became public products." The room had fallen almost completely silent. Meghan insisted she simply wanted peace after everything that had happened. Helen responded softly, "If peace is truly the goal, then eventually there has to be silence. Healing often happens away from cameras, not in front of them." Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Finally, Graham cleared his throat and looked toward the other guests, hoping someone might rescue the conversation with a joke or lighter story. No one moved. Every person in the studio remained focused on the extraordinary exchange unfolding before them. Helen asked one final question. "What does being truly accepted mean to you? Is it being watched by millions, or being welcomed by the people whose approval matters most?" Meghan stood, picked up her handbag, and shook her head. I won't sit here while someone who portrayed my husband's grandmother believes that gives her authority to judge my life. The audience watched in complete silence as the atmosphere on the famous red sofa became heavier than anyone could have imagined at the start of the evening. Helen's expression softened into a thoughtful smile as the conversation reached its most emotional point. There was no sign of anger in her voice, only quiet conviction born from years of experience. When I portrayed Queen Elizabeth II, she said, I didn't simply memorize lines. I spent years reading about her life, her responsibilities, and the demands placed upon her. I wanted to understand the person behind the public image. That process taught me what genuine service looks like. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Service is often invisible. It asks for patience, consistency, and sacrifice without expecting applause. That's what I came to admire. Turning toward Meghan, Helen continued. What I've observed from your public appearances presents a very different picture. I see someone who has spoken extensively about difficult experiences, yet the focus often returns to personal recognition rather than collective responsibility. It leaves me wondering whether the institution was ever fully understood. The studio remained silent. Meghan rose from her seat, visibly frustrated. This is unbelievable, she said. You've chosen to repeat the same criticisms I've heard for years. Helen stayed seated, her composure unchanged. I'm not repeating criticism, she replied calmly. I'm describing what I've observed. You became part of an institution with centuries of history. After leaving it, you've continued to discuss it publicly while still being connected to the title and recognition that came with it. That combination naturally invites questions. Meghan insisted that leaving royal life had required enormous personal sacrifice. Helen acknowledged that major life changes are never simple. Every transition comes with challenges, she said. But from the outside, many people see someone who exchanged one privileged life for another. That's why your story is interpreted differently by different audiences. By now, Graham Norton had stopped trying to redirect the discussion. The other guests remained unusually quiet, sensing that interrupting would only make the moment more uncomfortable. You'll regret saying these things, Meghan remarked as she gathered her belongings. Helen smiled gently. After a lifetime in this profession, I've learned that respectful honesty is rarely something to regret. What would trouble me far more is staying silent when I genuinely believe an important point deserves discussion. Meghan paused near the edge of the stage. You don't know me, she said firmly. Helen nodded. You're right. I don't know your private life. None of us truly can. We only know what has been presented publicly through interviews, documentaries, books, and speeches. Those public choices shape how people understand your story. She continued in the same measured tone. My impression is that you embraced the visibility that came with royal life, but found the responsibilities far more difficult than expected. That's an understandable challenge, but it's different from suggesting the entire institution existed only to cause harm. Without another word, Meghan walked toward the exit. The studio doors closed quietly behind her, leaving an unmistakable silence hanging over the famous red sofa. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Graham looked around the studio before managing an uneasy smile. Well, he said, that was certainly unexpected. Helen adjusted her sleeve with calm composure. I apologize if the discussion became heavier than intended, she said. That wasn't my goal. Graham chuckled nervously. I don't think we've ever experienced anything quite like that on this program. The comedian sitting nearby finally broke the silence. I've completely forgotten every joke I planned tonight. That remark earned the first genuine laugh of the evening. Helen smiled warmly. I think comedy has a difficult job after conversations like this. Grateful for the lighter mood, Graham suggested moving to another topic, but before he could continue, Helen asked to make one final observation. Looking toward the audience, she reflected on how her own views had evolved over the years. I wasn't raised to admire the monarchy, she explained. Preparing to portray Queen Elizabeth II challenged many of my assumptions. Studying her life showed me the discipline, restraint, and lifelong commitment required by the role. Whether people support the institution or not, I came to respect the extraordinary sense of duty involved. She concluded with a broader thought. When public figures receive remarkable opportunities, people naturally hope to see gratitude alongside criticism. Honest conversations matter, but so does recognizing the responsibilities that accompany extraordinary privilege. Graham nodded thoughtfully. I think everyone watching will have plenty to reflect on after tonight. The audience responded with quiet applause, still absorbing a conversation that would undoubtedly remain one of the evening's most memorable moments. Helen took a slow breath before speaking again, her voice softer than before, but carrying across the silent studio. My grandmother never missed the Queen's Christmas broadcast, she said. Every year she'd sit in front of the television because she admired what she believed the Queen represented: steadiness, duty, and quiet service. I suspect there are many families who feel the same way. Those are the people I was thinking about tonight. She glanced toward the audience. Many people watched the late Queen dedicate her entire adult life to public service. Whether they supported the monarchy or not, they respected the discipline it required. When they hear constant criticism of that legacy, they often feel they have no voice in the conversation. Tonight, I simply offered mine. The recording aired later that evening exactly as it had unfolded. Producers chose not to edit the exchange, believing viewers should see the discussion in its original form. Within hours, short clips from the interview spread rapidly across television broadcasts and social media. The conversation became one of the most talked-about moments of the week. Among the clips that circulated most widely were Helen's challenging questions about public recognition, responsibility, and the lasting consequences of speaking publicly about family disagreements. Viewers debated every exchange, with supporters and critics on both sides sharing their opinions online. Shortly afterward, Meghan's representatives released a statement describing the interview as an unfair confrontation. They argued that the discussion had shifted from conversation to personal criticism and suggested that Helen had approached the exchange from a perspective strongly sympathetic to the monarchy. Helen later responded through her own representatives. There was nothing coordinated about the discussion, the statement explained. The conversation developed naturally. My observations came from decades of studying Britain's constitutional history, portraying Queen Elizabeth II, and reflecting on the meaning of public duty. The statement continued by emphasizing that Helen's opinions had been formed over many years, rather than during a single television appearance. I've had the privilege of portraying the Queen, meeting her, and learning about the extraordinary demands placed upon her throughout her reign. When conversations involve that legacy, I believe thoughtful questions are entirely appropriate. For Helen, the interview became another unexpected chapter in a career already defined by memorable performances. Many commentators argued that her years researching Queen Elizabeth II had given her a distinctive perspective on the institution and the values it sought to represent. For Meghan, the discussion generated a different kind of public reaction. Unlike criticism from tabloids or anonymous commentators, this exchange came from one of Britain's most respected actresses, an Academy Award winner whose reputation had been built across decades of acclaimed work. That difference shaped much of the public conversation that followed. Commentators focused less on who had won the exchange and more on the contrast between two very different life stories. Helen's supporters pointed to a career built over half a century through theater, film, and television, with honors earned through professional achievement. Meghan's supporters argued that her experiences within the royal family gave her every right to discuss the challenges she believed she had faced. What many viewers remembered most, however, was not a particular accusation or rebuttal, but the questions themselves. Helen had asked what achievements stood independently of royal recognition. She had asked how public criticism affected private family relationships. She had questioned what duty and service meant once public life had changed. Whether audiences agreed with those questions or rejected them entirely, they became the lasting focus of the broadcast. By the time the credits rolled, one thing was beyond dispute. Millions of viewers had witnessed an unusually candid television conversation that continued to dominate public discussion long after the cameras stopped recording. For some, the interview highlighted the value of lifelong service and earned recognition. For others, it underscored the importance of allowing people to tell their own stories, even when those stories are controversial. Whatever conclusion viewers reached, the evening demonstrated how two sharply different perspectives on responsibility, privilege, and public life could collide on one famous red sofa, creating a television moment that people would continue discussing for weeks afterward.